Lisa Feldman Barrett. I'm not sure if you've done work together, but at least you're.
I found out about her because of you and your
sure.
podcast with her. And then I brought her onto Instagram to do an Instagram live about emotion.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating. And she's a very spirited and very, very smart woman. And
fearless
yeah.
and brilliant. So I love her. She's amazing. She's not a scholar of hallucinogens or dreams, but she had this intuition that there may be a connection between the kind of dissociation that happens in dreaming and that happens in like psychedelics. Because of my previous conversation with you on this podcast, Matthew Johnson from Johns Hopkins reached out, and he said that he commented, I think, on something that we commented on. I don't even remember exactly what, but that there's not many studies. It's not being psychedelics are not being rigorously studied in an academic setting, like with the full rigor of science. And he said, well, actually, that's exactly what we're doing, and they're extremely well funded now. And it's been a long battle to get it accepted as a serious scientific pursuit. So, and I'd like to ask you a little bit about that. But
Sure.
do you have a sense about connection between dreams and psychedelics, or these different explorations of mind states that are outside of the standard normal one? That's the wake mindset.
Yeah, I loved your discussion with Matthew. I knew of the Hopkins group and the stuff they were doing, but I didn't know much about it at all. And I learned a ton from that podcast. I reached out to him just to say, love what you're doing. I think it's incredible. So yeah, your podcast has been a great source of serious academic and intellectual conversation for me. I think what they're doing at Hopkins is amazing. He has a collaborator there, actually, that had a very popular paper I just throw out there for fun, who was a postdoc at Stanford. Her name is Gul. She's Turkish, I believe. And I apologize, her last name escapes me at the moment, but that's just a function of my brain. She had a paper showing that she put octopi on MDMA, on ecstasy, and found out, this was published in Current Biology, showing, it was a great journal, showing that the octopi then wanted to spend more time with other octopi. They started cuddling.
Yeah.
So they're colleagues out there. But the Hopkins project is super interesting because I think they were initially supported mainly through private philanthropy. Mm-hmm. And now you're starting to see some more interest at the level of NIH about psychedelics. It's a complicated space because the psychedelics are always looked at through the lens of the 60s and people losing their mind. And there's I always say, you don't want a Ken Kesey out of the game. Ken Kesey was amazing, right? Part of the whole Beat Generation thing. And he was actually at the VA near Stanford. That's where he eventually, in Menlo Park, he wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or maybe that was about him. Anyway, the comments will tell me how wrong I am, but I think I'm tossing these words in the right general direction. But, Huxley, Kesey, they did a lot of LSD, and they all lost their jobs, right? They lost their jobs at big institutions like Harvard and Stanford and elsewhere, or they left because they made themselves the experiments.
Yes.
Hopkins, as far as I know, is one of the first places, if not the first place, where whatever Matt may or may not be doing in his own life, I don't know, it's really about the patients and whether or not the patients in these institutional review board approved studies, whether or not they're getting better in situations like depression. I think it's clear that there's a very close relationship between hallucinogenic states and dreaming of the sort that would describe for REM dreaming. Mm-hmm. And there's a terrific set of books and body of scientific literature from a guy named Alan Hobson, who was an MD, is at Harvard Med, and he wrote books like Dream Drugstore. Mm-hmm. One of the first neuroscience books I ever read was about hallucinations and how psychedelics and dreaming are very similar. That was way back when I was in high school. I was just curious. And he really understood the relationship between LSD and REM dreams and how similar they are. I think psychedelics, and Matt knows way more about this than I do, of course, but psychedelics have some very interesting properties. They are certainly not for everybody, right? And kids, it's a problem. I think the major issues right now around the psychedelic conversation is that it's clear that they can unveil certain elements of neuroplasticity. They make the brain amenable to change. changing up space-time relationships, changing up the emotional load of an event and being able to reframe that. It's clear that happens. But there's two major issues. One is that people talk about plasticity as if plasticity is the goal. But plasticity is a state within which you can direct neurology. And the question is, what changes are you trying to get to? So people are just taking psychedelics to unveil plasticity without thinking about what circuits they want to modify and how. I think that's a problem. I think there's great potential, however, for people opening up these states of plasticity with psychedelics or otherwise and directing the plastic changes toward a particular endpoint. And there's an absolutely spectacular paper out of UC Davis, published as a full article in Nature just a couple months ago, showing that there are psychedelics that are now can be modified. So chemists have gotten into the game now and modifying to take away the hallucinogenic component where you still get the neuroplasticity components.
Wow.
And for a lot of people, they'll be like, oh, well, that's no fun. That's not giving you the wild experience. But I do think that holds great potential for people that wouldn't otherwise orient towards some of these drugs. So I think it's really marvelous what's happening and what's about to happen.